Good morning. This is Dr. B. It is Tuesday the 5th. And as far as I can tell, the world has begun. For those of you teaching in the city system have, I think, till Thursday for babies to show up. But I know that you were all hard at work getting those classrooms ready to rock and roll. Quick side step. Talk about culture, actually, is that a million years ago when I became a principal of an elementary school, I had worked in elementary schools as a curriculum uh, coach for several years before that. And that's what actually qualified me to be working in elementary school and to have fun with it. You have to stop for a second. I'm having trouble with my air conditioner. Stay right there. At any rate, so I've worked in secondary in terms of schools were open for most of my career at that point. Whenever the first day of school was, you showed up and you got your motor running, and certainly there were teachers who were coming in before the school year was going to open, but that was a rarity. It wasn't practice, certainly in the secondary. Again, speaking about culture. So needless to say, I was kind of surprised the first year when I became the elementary school principal that first week before school began, uh, school was overrun with teachers. And I can't think of a classroom teacher who never showed up, except maybe one, who never showed up the day before school began, the week before school began, I should say. Bulletin boards and making welcoming posters and so forth. And that's a culture premise, believe it or not. That is a culture premise. Just leaving that with you. I'm sure that you can relate to that. I know at least one of you, I think one of my two Nicole's, last name begins with a J, if I remember right. I think she's second, or at least she was last time we spoke last week. And so well, I'm wandering too far into the farce. But I would say that most of you, since you seem to be elementary people, you are certainly getting your classrooms ready to meet the baby's needs. They walk in, understanding that, as one of my superintendents used to say, good beginnings, strong beginnings means stronger ends. Strong beginnings mean stronger ends. And if that makes sense, if you think about it. This, as you know, I do 2 videos a week at least. And this particular video is for week 3, and it's connected with chapter 3 of the collective mindset. As I think out loud, this book is, I think, 9 chapters long. And the course is, I think, 14 or 15 classes long. We will run out of chapters as we get through the weeks, and that's fine. I just want to make sure that I hit the highlights of it, fully expecting that professionally you will be reading, not only reading the chapters as I paste them out for you in the syllabus, but also that you will take the time to truly marinate in some of this material, because a lot of these things we're talking about, quite frankly, is doctoral work, not master's degree, professional diploma work in lots of senses. And that should flatter you, because I wouldn't assign a book to a class that I didn't think that it's not a doctoral class to be able to necessarily engage some of the more the depth of what a doctoral class would do. And they will stand you all in good stead from a number of different counts. I promise you. Money back guarantee, if you can find me. So at any rate, I'm going to do 2 things. And I'll probably think of about 4 more before I'm finished, but here they come. Before I move over into chapter 2, I'm looking at I'm sorry, into chapter 3. I'm looking at chapter 2, and chapter 2, in my mind, doesn't do enough by way of climate. So I want to make that point. I want to make that distinction. You may be thinking I'm splitting hairs, no pun intended, but it's an important distinction, extremely important distinction in certain senses. And so when we talk about culture, we're not necessarily talking about climate, and certainly and vice versa. If we're talking about climate, we're talking about not necessarily talking about culture per se. Do they overlap? If we did a Venn diagram, would they be a big intersection between the two circles? Without a doubt. But there are some distinctions. And I'll simplify this for you for the moment. Climate is what people think the culture is. Climate is what people think the culture is, even though they may be inaccurate, even though they may not realize they're being inaccurate. Because climate is about perception. Culture is about what is. Climate is what's on the ground, what's really going on down deep, way down deep and underneath, and those basic beliefs and assumptions I keep talking about, and those values. Climate is about what teachers, stakeholders perceive is going on. You can stop a teacher in the hallway and say, "What's this school like?" And I'm not demeaning teachers. It's just a human nature that any individual, not just a teacher, would quickly give you an answer one way or another. Oh, this is the most wonderful school we've ever been to. Everybody loves each other. We work well together and so forth. And then the other segment, hopefully not the majority, will talk to you from their mental models. They'll talk to you from, oh, well, the faculty room's dirty. Or, well, the principal's a dope. And the parents are terrible. And what they're really doing is telling you what they feel, what perception they have about what's going on. But it doesn't necessarily make them correct. Remember that when you're interning. Remember that when you have a stripe on your shoulder as a principal or as a program chair, where you may take to heart what someone is saying in terms of what they think is going on. But until you give them the opportunity to get their fingernails dirty and look down underneath and look for those basic beliefs and assumptions, all they're giving you is surface symptoms. To continue with a metaphor I use in lots of different places, if I cough a lot, I go to a doctor and I say to the doctor, "I'm coughing." And the good doctor, well, they'll do two things. One is they'll probably give you something to suppress the cough, so that you're not uncomfortable. But the other part of it is they want to find out why you're coughing. For me, for example, I may have said this before, I have some medicine that seems to be giving me that kind of problem now. And I cough about every 2 sentences. I'm trying to stop coughing right now, as a matter of fact. So medication can cause coughs. An infection can cause coughs. An allergy can cause coughs. And so the good doctor is going to try to use high diagnostic powers with the data that she has to come up with the best conclusion. And if they don't have enough data, they're going to run some kind of tests to do it. Now, in your case, your tests is going to be how you try to discern your culture. Now, the survey I distributed a couple of days ago and said I went back on the 12th. That would be next week from today, actually, is something of a climate survey, but not totally. There are plenty of climate surveys out there, and all you have to do is go to Google Scholar and look for surveys about estimating culture and climate for that matter. You'll come up with many good ones too, as a matter of fact. Also, if you have the time, and I would recommend this to you again when you're practicing at being an administrator, if you're a cooperating administrator, it gives you permission, or when you become a full-fledged administrator on your own, to work the artifact piece. It's amazing what will come out of that if you give a little time. I think I have a war story I want to share, but I'll probably save it for another conversation. Ergo, Therefore, realize climate and culture are not equated. Climate is a perception of the culture. It is not the culture. Climate can be incorrect. Perceptions of what the climate is could easily be incorrect. And so you have to kind of take it with a jaded eye and quite frankly, share these 2 points of view with your staff. This is the difference between culture and climate. And so when you tell me about what your basic beliefs and assumptions are, and what your values are that represent this culture, be sure that you know that you might be coming from where you're coming from rather than from what is. And I'll make that point in different places along the way, but I just wanted to make sure that you work with that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to chapter 3, which is part 2, which goes back to growth zones for the model. Okay, and I'm going to work backwards on this one for a while. Let's talk about the model again. We go back. I'm going back to, I think, page 9. There it is. Yeah, page 9. You'll notice that on page 9, again, understanding that this is a small book and the model is squeezed together. And as I told you last week, we tried to get the publisher to publish the model in colors, and that didn't fly with the publisher. But if you look at the growth zones again, you'll see that we have begun to play around with the external pillars that prop up everything else that goes with it. Here comes one of those co-ops. And at the very bottom of the middle part of the model, you'll see culture and climate assessment. The basis for really everything that can happen, will happen, and could happen, given your capacity and your stakeholders' capacity to circle their wagons around what has to be done. All right. So now we're talking more nearly about the growth zones. Growth zones extend out from the bottom of the arrow. I have big bases on the bottom of the right above the culture piece, and there are 5. All right. Systems thinking, shared vision. My eyesight's getting old. Collaborative leadership, design thinking, creativity, and what's wrong with me today? Collegiality. Some of those kind of blur together, I think, as I look at this model after the fact, but they do deserve different distinctions. And so the first growth zone chapter begins on page 35 and summarizes a good piece of them. It's kind of a lengthy chapter. What I'm going to do, I'm going to 43, page 43. So what you need to do, let's work backwards. Let's go to page 43. I'll comment to each of these points that are recommended for you to consider on page 43. And then let's go back to the beginning of the chapter and reinforce them. So as far as essential points are concerned, we said that my author colleagues and I said that the growth zones of the model consist of cultural capacity and engagement. Now, I make the distinction, I believe I've said it before. It's one thing to be engaged, it's another thing to be involved. Involved might mean that we know that this Rosh Hashanah next week, I mean, a lot of you will be off. So you know what's going on, you keep track of things. Engagement is you want to contribute. You are part of the whole with a W to contribute to the effectiveness of that building or that program. That's the difference. And so when we're talking here about cultural capacity, we're talking about an engagement. The engagement piece is you've been empowered. You've empowered each other. Think about that. Stakeholders have empowered each other. Principal has empowered everyone to contribute to the whole with the W, to the sum, the SUM of who and what the school system has to be. Now, connected to that is the premise of capacity. Okay, there was a time when I ran track and I was 50 pounds lighter and probably 10 times faster. And I had the capacity to run a pretty good quarter mile. All right. Today, I don't have that capacity. For one reason, you can see that now I didn't have a white beard then, or any kind of beard in those days, because it is what it is. And I just can't run. I forget what my times were on a quarter mile, but I had a pretty good time in a quarter mile. I can't do it anymore. I can't hit a baseball anywhere near as far as I could or throw a football, I mean, physically speaking. And so that's because my capacity is diminished or perhaps shifted over to some other things, I would hope, physically and mentally and emotionally, for that matter. Capacity speaks to the strengths of the building to change itself. You can say, come on, let's change. Let's not do this, let's do this. And if they don't know, people don't know how to do it, that's an example of a capacity deficit. Something that has to be understood, root caused, defined, narrowed, and targeted. Again, not with a snap of a finger. This is deep, reflective. There's an important word. Reflective thinking. Not only individually, but also, perhaps more importantly, in tandem with your colleagues. And so you can do that with each other. And part of that is communication. True communication, true dialogue where people are listening to each other. A la Senge's mental model thinking description, a la the issue of what people do in teams, which speaks to the third component in that essential point, which would be collaboration. Read my lips on this. Just because everyone's got a master's degree and they're sitting in a room doesn't make them as smart as everybody thinks, each person thinks that they are. Sit back in a committee meeting or group faculty meeting, any meeting of 4 people with a master's degree. Sometimes you want to put your finger down your throat because they're too busy running out their series of I thinks, I-thinks. Well, I think. And they're really not listening to each other, let alone trying to figure out what another person is likely saying so they can complete the puzzle together. And so that whole idea of that's a true set of skills, sophisticated set of skills. Because a group, individuals in a group have a sense of their own sense of reality. And here's where I get doctoral with you for a moment. But they don't necessarily have a group sense of reality. And until they do, it's pretty hard for them to collaborate, to work together. But the growth zones consist of many issues here, which would be, as I said, cultural capacity and engagement, communication, collaboration, whether they reflect and talk about and dialogue about teaching and learning among themselves. And you go into a faculty room sometimes, again, I'm being a wise guy, saying sometimes I used to want to put my finger down my throat because the last thing anybody was talking about in the faculty room was what they use in the classroom worked, and then maybe somebody else would try it. They might do it in a meeting with the staff, with in a different kind of meeting, but where it's just like having a cup of coffee and trying to figure out who will win the Yankee game tonight is not part of the conversation. It could be argued that's where people want to blow off steam and don't want to talk about those things, but maybe the nerd in me thinks that that's where it should also happen informally, organically. And so the idea of culture of unified purpose comes in here. It's hard to have, if you have a culture of fragmented purpose, and you can't have that, unfortunately. And sometimes we would think that there are more schools with that than not with it. And that's just off the top of my bald head observation. It doesn't make me correct. Maybe more have collective purpose than unified purpose than I would sometimes encounter. Of cultural awareness now, in this case, remember, cultural, as far as I'm talking about now, is not about the children whom you're trying to shape programs for in terms of the project leader course that you're in. I'm not talking about that kind of culture yet. I'm talking about whether they're aware of their basic beliefs and assumptions across the board, not just 5 people who've taken the time to think about it more than the rest. In order to have continuous innovation and change. I may have said this to you before. Pat Riley was the first, just did an HBO series there where he was depicted. He was the extremely successful coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. Then became a coach for the Knicks, and not as successful, but I would say pretty successful. Who then left to become the general manager of the Miami Heat. If I remember right. He's still there, and he's much to be said for his talents to run a basketball team from many different corners. And I think he's the one. There's another person I often think of too, whom you would never have heard of, who should be the president of Ford Motor Company. So I usually see the following quote attributed to one of the 2 men. The second man was Lee Iacocca. The first one I think of is Pat Riley, who purportedly said, when you stop trying to get better, purportedly said first, when you stop trying to get better, you stop being good. When you stop trying to get better, you stop being good. Now think about when a leader, and now in your case, is going to be you, when you say, we got some holes, HOLES holes, E&L programs. This is a problem, that's a problem, this is a problem. What can we do to fix it? If someone doesn't say it out loud, somebody, at least one, hopefully only one, more likely more, will say, it's working pretty well. You want to make it perfect? How can we make it any better than it is? We're working our tails off now, and come on. Instead of recognizing that their obligation to make everything better all the time. Working within all the same slices of the pizza pie. I'm smiling because that just makes it that much more difficult. But that's what continuous innovation and change is about. Continue with my athletics analogies. I hope all of you are with me on these things. I mean, the Yankees and the Mets have fallen on hard times this year. Can't call it mismanagement, I don't think. But I think you can call, well, maybe it is mismanagement in both cases, with the idea that if you take out a checkbook, you can buy the best players. Well, that hasn't always worked. And there are plenty of teams with much lower payrolls than the Yankees or the Mets, who are ahead of them in the standings as we speak, because they do more with less. They're able to future better, to realize what they need and how they need to manage what their resources are. That's about futuring. It's also about recognizing that they have to be creative and innovative. Those words are synonymous, obviously, to change how we do things. But that goes down a lot of teachers' throats sideways. I'm going to pick on old teachers, veteran teachers, especially those who have been around the block several times, especially the next day or two when teachers re-enter their classrooms, who are tired of hearing from the new principal or from the new superintendent and say, well, we got to do it this way and that way. We got to do more with less. You might hear that one. Doesn't make them wrong. It just means that they're not delivering a message that the people are ready to hear. What does that say about what the leadership should be doing? And in your case, it just occurs to me, since you're doing project leader certification in E&L admirably and well, it would be lots of times you have to sell a program or the idea of a program to people who look at you as either a third member of the family or a distant cousin. That's one way to look at it, and also aren't particularly interested in finding ways to help those children. Of course, those children are more difficult to teach than the general education student who is not from a foreign country. Same is true for special education. Obviously, there are similarities between special education programs and E&L programs, not total. Certainly there's overlaps. Each set of children are children in need. And what will happen, as you all well know, and certainly have experienced, someone may stop you in the faculty room. Hey, you have to find out what's wrong with Johnny. The kid doesn't speak a word of English. I don't know what to do with this child. You teach him. Make it easier for me. Or another teacher may say, I really need some tactics from you. I need you to support me to meet that child's needs in my classroom too. I'm not sure which one outweighs which, but I know that you have opinions about that. And how you manage that will speak to the success of how those children will successfully negotiate their transition from the country they came from to becoming productive, full-fledged American citizens. Again, not tomorrow, but up the road. The other essential point we talk about here is that, and I already said this, these are to be considered areas of opportunities for reflection. That 5 why premise, the ability to think through. I'm being very nerdy right now as I speak to you as a leader, potential leader, and perhaps to your teachers. And wow, I don't know too many people who do it, but the ones who have taken my advice have thanked me for it. And that would be journaling. Now, who has time to write for 30 minutes every day? If you're, getting your shoes on to get on the subway to get commute to God knows where, or to be able to manage your children as you're trying to get them out the door too. I'm sure I'm being sexist on that. I hope that I'm not. All those things apply, and it's easy to say, what you should do is get up another half hour earlier and write for 30 minutes a day. Money back guaranteed. If you do that with any kind of regularity, not necessarily 7 days a week, you'll be amazed at the meditative SEL conclusions and adjustments that you will make in your day-to-day life and your day-to-day instructional practices. I promise you that. If I could get any of you to go for your doctorates when we're done together in this course, if you came to me and said, Dr. B, give me a topic, that's the topic I would give you. And so that's about reflection. Now, the Harvard School of Education spends a lot of time on that. And you'll find elements of the Harvard School of Education programs woven throughout this book. And especially when we talk about reflection, collaborative inquiry, which is people talking together and hearing each other's points of view, and ultimately action research, and drawing conclusions from that action research to improve whatever it is that you were investigating. Our newest book, which won't be out, I guess, until late winter 24, we'll give you some more concrete ways to do that. But we're certainly going to talk about it in this book. And the last essential point was understanding your roles understanding your roles as a leader that enables school reform to recognize whether they're used to improve the entire process. Again, it's the sum, S-U-M, it's the whole with a W. It's not about picking pieces off. When a Rubik's Cube comes to me, I run because I've never been able to ever solve a Rubik's Cube. I have 2 nephews that can do it with their eyes closed. It's scary. But you know that a Rubik's Cube comes to you in the package every side, 6 sides of each with a uniform color, blue, red, yellow, whatever. And then the minute you scramble it up on those 3 axes, you're then charged with getting them back where they're supposed to be. And it's not easy. So understand what we're talking about. A change is like a Rubik's Cube. So when I turn one side to align that with all of its colors, I'm affecting another side systemically. I have to account for all 6 of the sides. I'm going to show you how to do some of that when we get to the final assignment. So those essential points on 43, in many respects, capture the whole chapter pretty nicely. It identifies those growth zones more specifically. I just spoke to them. I emphasize reflection and collaborative inquiry and decision-making within the culture, not necessarily the climate, the culture, and how to understand what your roles are. And that word school reform gives me a rash, and it should, because no one knows what that means. School restructuring, school recreation. That's what it means to me. I don't remember the exact quote, but Einstein once said, if you do the same thing over and over again and it keeps giving you incorrect results, that's the definition of insanity. And the question that you can't answer, maybe you can't, I can. I think, Kay, you seem to have some opinions about that in last week's office hours, is that if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're perpetuating the mediocrity under which we suffer in the first place. If you just keep doing what we're doing, we're perpetuating the mediocrity that we were doing in the first place, and getting away with it more than we should. Hence, people will say, "No, that school's done. Let's make it a charter school. Let's go to homeschooling. Let's go to parochial schools." They'll do it. The public schools can't, because they won't, or because they're unable to do it. Those unions. It's not about the unions specifically. It's about the whole with a W, he shouted. So what are the issues and themes to consider in this chapter? Again, on page 43. So as you consider these growth zones, what you need to do is try to, again, take their temperature, take each growth zone's temperature or its pulse, and try to determine where the positives are, first of all, and where the yes buts are. More importantly, try to determine where the one growth zone crosses over and impacts another growth zone. Certainly, you're going to get more pound for the buck. Have your money spent, metaphorically speaking, more wisely if you can find. There's a slogan, and I can't think of it, where you can kill one bird with one stone, kill more than one bird with one stone. Not that I want to kill any birds. So again, identify your strengths. Take the weaknesses or the absence of strengths that you may recognize. We'll talk more about this in a couple of chapters. Take the absence of those strengths and see how you can convert them. How can you use your strengths to fix the weaknesses? And I keep going back to medical metaphors. A friend of mine just hurt his back very badly, and he's having a tough time. In fact, I have to take my grandson, one of my 14-year-old grandson, to the doctor later because he hurt his back playing football, and he needs a doctor to look at it. And mommy and daddy both have to work today, so Grandpa's taking him. And I already said to him, I said, "Yeah, well, Brandon, you have to bulk up those abdominals. Because the stronger your abdominals are, the more it will compensate for the weakness in your back." And he said, "Okay, Grandpa, I'll take care of it." And he will, because he likes me. And so that last bullet under issues and themes to consider is an important one. I'm going to make that a discussion question. I haven't decided what I'm doing with that yet this week. How would you use your strengths to address your deficits? Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the chapter just for a bit. I don't see a need to go over this all again. Most of the chapters have a scenario. This particular scenario speaks to communication and shared vision issues, and I think it speaks to it well. Again, it talks to the mindset. There's another scenario that talks about futuring, my favorite topic, as you may have guessed. And we'll talk more about that more specifically down the line. But that quote on the bottom of 37 is something you should write on the back of your hand. I didn't make it up. It came from Richardson, who said, when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people: those who let it happen, those who make it happen, and those who wonder what happened. And so where do you sit as an individual, as a teacher, or as a prospective leader? Which one characterizes you? Maybe more importantly, again, talking about culture and climate, which one do you think characterizes your colleagues? My experience from a long time doing this is that many teachers are extremely passive. I'm not sure altogether why, maybe because they've been beaten down so much by incompetent leadership. I tend to think that's what it is. Maybe other reasons, but I find teachers often very passive. First day I became a principal, by law, the principal on the first day of school is supposed to run a fire drill. And I told the faculty in opening meeting with them, there's going to be a fire drill. I even told them when it was going to be, so there wouldn't be any surprises. And so I said, at 2:10 is going to be a fire drill. It was after the lunch periods and that kind of thing. And teacher came up to me at the end of the faculty meeting and said, which side of the hallway do you want me to walk on? I said, excuse me? So do you want the children on the right side of the hallway or the left side of the hallway? So it just never occurred to me anyone would ask that question, which is the deficit I probably had. And I said, well, which side do you think you should walk on? I was hoping she was going to say the right side, but I wanted to hear what she had to say. She turned green on me and she said, you want to know what I think? So I said, of course I want to hear what you have to say. I'm sure Mr. Smith, literally the name of the principal who preceded me, had a expectation of one side or another, so it wouldn't be chaos in the hallway. He goes, well, we always walk on the right side. I said, was that safe? Is that the way you think it would work? She said, yeah. I said, I have a good idea. Let's walk on the right side. Which, always shocked me because, she expected me to tell her to do something that just made sense as it should have altogether. Again, we talk about cultural capacity on page 38, which speaks to the issue of capacity. I think we've done a nice job with that. That second to last paragraph in that section is a nice capture. All the components of the collective mindset model are designed to engage stakeholders. There's that engage verb. To be reflective in its nature and expand its cultural capacity. Cultural capacity is as much a belief held by its constituents as it is an actual reality. The next section speaks to collaboration and communication. Again, has a pretty good scenario that I think makes it real for those of you who may not necessarily think it's just an abstraction. And as we move over to teaching and learning, another scenario. I'm going to read some of this one. I like this one. Elementary Systems Superintendent Robin spoke for the first time. We are all committed to the idea of recreating what we do in our school. I hear the same buzzwords about culture and transformation and change. Do not always hear what we mean deep down about what these truly mean. Virginia asked, do you mean something like how will we know what change will actually look like? Will we know it when we see it? Yes, Robin exclaimed. In my mind, we will know that effective change in practices will result in improved learning about meaningful ideas and skills, that we will see our students eager to learn, attending school, and engaging in meaningful projects. Everyone nodded. Everyone began to offer examples of ideal learning and happy students. Another way to phrase that is, what does the future want of me? What does the future want of me? We talked about cultural continuous innovation and change. Again, another scenario that I like very much. So this chapter is well organized. It's a good introduction to getting more specific about those areas in the coming chapter, which should be page 40, starts on 47, about systems thinking. Now, I know you know about systems thinking already, but you can't hear it enough times. Somewhere in there, I'm going to give you a discussion question. I may just take a, I'm not sure how I'm going to approach that, but I may ask you to take a discussion question from the essential points and themes issue. So I'll be ready for that. Enough said. I wish you all a successful opening if you haven't already begun. And if things have gone left instead of right, reflect about it. By the way, not that even though I'm old, I'm not necessarily a guru about everything. If you have a question about something that you're wondering about, worrying about, in terms of your own practices and your day-to-day travails, I'm fine with that, with offering my 2 cents if you ask for it. So feel free to ask a question or to put it up on the discussion board. That's okay too. Maybe better than if I were to give you my old-fashioned advice. Take care. Be safe.